Reading from the New York Times. Tanks, artillery, and infantry have crossed from Russia into an unbreached part of eastern Ukraine today in recent days, attacking Ukrainian forces, causing panic and alarmingly wholesale retreat in the town where the invasion occurred. So in what Ukrainian and Western military officials describe as a stealth invasion. Interesting what's happening there. Now, just to give people some context, because I needed it, and my hunch is you need it too. What you're seeing there in the sort of bottom left in Novoazovsk, that's the name of the town, that's where the Russian troops, or the troops loyal to the rebels, maybe they're not Russian, except they're obviously Russian. That's where they came across. There's also been fighting nearby. You see the town just a little bit west in Mariupol. Those are all sort of crucial towns on the Sea of Azov, which ultimately Russia might want if they're setting up any sort of independent enclave of separatists inside of Ukraine, if that ever happens. What they're also, the theory is that they want to draw troops down from Donetsk, and Luhansk, where the other fighting is gone. They want to draw Ukrainian troops away. Mm-hmm. That's the theory of why that has happened down there. So for two reasons. One, that they'll want to have a port if there is a separatist enclave set up there inside eastern Ukraine, and also to get troops away. So again, considered a stealth invasion. Here are the alarming parts about that. Let's go right to graphic 11. Exhausted, filthy, and dismayed Ukrainian soldiers have been staggering out of Novoazovsk for safer territory, and they said that they were cannon fodder for the forces coming out of Russia. Go right to the next one. Some of the retreating Ukrainian soldiers appeared unwilling to fight. The commander of their unit, part of the 9th Brigade in that town in western Ukraine, barked at the men to turn around, and to no effect. And then I half like this guy. All right, he said, anybody who refuses to fight, sit apart from the others. 11 men sat apart from the others. The others returned to the city. By the way, the Ukrainian authorities say 13 soldiers were killed in the fighting in Novoazovsk. Senior American official, this is graphic 13, has this to say: Russia is clearly trying to put its finger on the scale to tip things back in favor of its proxies, the separatists. Artillery barrages and other Russian military actions have taken their toll on the Ukrainian military. As we read from those two quotes, the Ukrainian military, they were stunned that this had happened. They were stunned at who they were fighting, and they were stunned at the level of the soldiers, at who they were fighting against. This is the political part of this. The Ukrainian retreat from the border area near Novoazovsk, which began Tuesday, came as Mr. Putin told Mr. Poroshenko, Putin obviously from Russia, Poroshenko from Ukraine, that the Ukrainian insurgency came as Mr. Putin told him that the Ukrainian insurgency is an internal matter that the Ukrainian government needed to negotiate a ceasefire. And while he was doing this at the meeting in Belarus with Poroshenko, that literally this incursion happens during their meeting, mm-hmm. that gives him, he thinks, some cover to at least say that he wouldn't incur greater sanctions. Like, hey, look, I'm meeting, we're trying to negotiate, and this is all happening. But in case, again, that we don't know who this is. By coupling the Russian military actions with those political talks in Minsk in Belarus, Mr. Putin appeared to be calculating that Moscow could intervene in eastern Ukraine with conventional Russian forces without risking further Western economic sanctions. I don't know why anybody would fall for that, but nonetheless, that's what Putin thinks. But then finally, there was this, which is, again, a little bit alarming, from a sergeant in the Ukrainian army. And as he was giving to this quote, he was holding up this symbol as he was giving this quote. Let's go to this graphic 16 here. I can tell you they are Russians, he said, but that is what proof I have. So the Ukrainians who are fighting are saying, yeah, they're in tanks. I don't know. I think they're Russians, but I can't prove it. They have the emblems of the separatists on them, because obviously if Russia were going to roll them in, they're smart enough to not have the Russian flag on the tanks. So that's what's happening in Ukraine. And you know what that sounds like? A war. Mm-hmm. A war involving a NATO member. So it's in everybody's interest to go as long as we can without calling it a war, so that we don't have to do any of this. A separate story today. Can we roll that video that Irina brought in? So here's what happened earlier this week: is the Ukrainian army captured these guys, and those guys are Russian paratroopers. And nobody disputes that they're Russian paratroopers, and they caught them in a Ukrainian town, and both the Russia and the paratroopers say, oh, we were there by mistake. I mean, like how much, like it's crazy because you read these stories and the journalists were all duty bound to say we're not sure they're Russians. But I mean, how much evidence do you need that they're Russians? You know, is it a full-scale Russian invasion? No, it's Russia fucking around, right? And obviously there are legitimate separatists there, separatists who don't know how to use anti-artillery weaponry that they're using, but so they're obviously getting massive help from the Russians, but that does give them some cover to at least say, no, we're not invading. We just think you have a civil war and you need to, and the longer it goes, at some point Russia can say, Russians are in jeopardy there, you guys are having a civil war, you can't control it, so we're gonna come in just in this little area and we're gonna make sure the Russians who live there are safe and we're gonna protect ourselves. And I think that's where we're headed, but imagine Poroshenko in Minsk he's got to shake hands with these guys. I don't know, man, this is super awkward.
Yeah, and there is some talk among officials in the Obama administration regarding whether or not it makes sense to arm the Ukrainian military to give them weapons in order to defend themselves and their land. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if I want the United States to get involved at all. But if that's where it stops, I mean, I guess I would be somewhat comfortable with that. But I mean, what should the U.S. do in this situation?
Negotiate sanctions. We don't want to be giving stuff to first of all, they already have stuff. And also, as we just saw, like we can give them better stuff, but look what they did. Like they're the Ukrainians, they retreated. They don't want to fight. I mean, look, and that would piss some of them off because some of them did fight and died. So they're willing to fight, but like they're not, this is not a circumstance that's going to get won over with better weapons or faster planes or bigger bombs, right? I mean,
none of these situations ever do get better in those, with that. I mean, and we have a history of arming people that hasn't been the greatest either.
Yeah, it turns out later on they become our enemies.
So I'm like, we might want to be really careful, and I'm with you. I mean, how far do we go, But at the same time, I'm also like, I wish people would just call it what it is and stop dancing around what's going on over there. This is a war. Russia's invaded Ukraine. Let's stop, why are we still playing Putin's dance? Like, why are we, look, we caught him with his hand in the cookie jar, like literally. And we're still gonna say like, no, he's not, no.
Because diplomatically, the alternative to saying no, he's not is one that we're not prepared to face. So that's what.
Then we should not even be over there.
Right, but we still have to, it's still, we have sanctions, we have a lot of alternatives, we have allies there, we have all kinds of things that we can do to put pressure on Putin short of this. And the other alternative is that in the end, who do we want to be best, who do we want a better relationship with? And the answer is probably Russia. So, what we want to make sure is that, I imagine, is that we don't allow Russia to run roughshod over more land than we're comfortable with them getting, which of course not what anybody in Ukraine, or a believer that Ukraine needs to be free and sovereign and independent of all this, that's probably not what they want to hear. But I think a lot of Americans, and the calculus is how dedicated to Ukraine's sovereignty do we really want to be?